Went way up. Let's come back from the break, please. All right, when we broke for a short break, we had finished the opening statements other than departments, which is reserved. So we'll turn now to the move-ins for the presentation of their witnesses and exhibits. Mr. Domenici.
Madam Hearing Officer, I have one short preliminary matter before we put our witnesses on. In that I understand the court's ruling was there's no rebuttal testimony, but there was quite a bit of direct rebuttal of my client's testimony in the testimony that was filed on Wednesday. So I would request that so long as my clients stay within their 15 minutes, that after they give their direct testimony, they'll be allowed a couple of minutes to respond to statements that have been made about their testimony.
I see. All right. Does anyone want to argue this, or can we just agree to that? You want to argue this? You do not want to argue this. Climate advocates want to argue this. I'm intent on keeping them in their time, certainly. He's going to keep it in the same 15 minutes. So, yes, Mr. Domenici.
Thank you, Madam Hearing Officer. We will call Ken Ortiz.
All righty, Mr. Ortiz, if you would raise your right hand, do you swear to tell the truth? Thank you.
Please introduce yourself to the boards.
I'm sorry, hold on. I'm very sorry to interrupt. Chair Paul, you have a question?
Thank you, Hearing Officer Orth. Really quickly, I just wanted to make sure that this meeting will be recorded so that members of the Air Quality Control Board, if they have to leave and come back, they will be able to review the recording so that we can all, make sure.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
I spoke with the Environmental Improvement Board's administrator, Pam Jones, and she has assured me that she has already said that she would, as soon as the WebEx recording was available to her, she would share it with your board administrator, Ms. Esty Armijo.
Thank you so much. Thank you for addressing that question. That's all I had.
Sorry, Mr. Domenici, go ahead.
Please introduce yourself, sir.
My name is Ken Ortiz. I'm the Executive Director of the New Mexico Auto Dealers Association, and I just want to thank you for the opportunity to be here.
Go ahead with summarize your testimony.
Sure. Thank you. So once again, thank you for the opportunity. I want to start off by maybe doing a little bit of a reset based on the testimony submitted by our opponents. I felt, and I was pretty disappointed in reading the testimony, where they're trying to portray our dealers and our association as empty. In fact, our dealers are investing hundreds of thousands of dollars across the state for the installation of EV infrastructure, the tools, the training. We're being prepared. We see EVs as part of the transportation pie, definitely not the end-all be-all because of Mexico's unique circumstances and transportation needs. But what we're talking about and what you all should be focusing on is emissions controls. And one of the glaring weaknesses in the proposed rules is allowing New Mexicans to leave the state, often traveling hundreds of miles, purchase a vehicle of choice, and bringing it back to New Mexico. How is that controlling emissions? What we're doing is forcing New Mexicans to leave the state, possibly spend more money traveling, purchasing vehicles out of the state losing tax revenue, dealerships basically losing business to out-of-state dealers, and yet they're employing thousands of New Mexicans. Another common misperception is that we are not supportive with all the great work that's been going on with the transition to electric vehicles. We have a great working relationship with a public service company in Mexico. They're working with us to basically train sales staff, getting the infrastructure in place, etc. You know, we're all working together collectively as it should be done. You know, but what you all have been presented is speculative data, anecdotal data, often data from outside of New Mexico. And we're not taking into effect, you know, the real circumstance. Shortly after the session, or after the hearing, I'm sorry, we heard from several legislators where they were asking us, hey, we're hearing from the Navajo Nation, and they have no idea what's going on. They have not been communicating. Can you meet with them and at least try to explain the rule and the potential impacts? So we had an opportunity to visit with President Dr. Boo Nygren with the Navajo Nation. And, you know, one of the first things he said is like, me or my team have not heard about this. Why haven't they come to us? What does this rule mean? So as we explained, you know, the 43% in year one, increasing year after year, you know, he indicated, you know, my main focus, if you will, is infrastructure as it pertains to water, electricity, broadband, paved roads. He goes, a lot of my members of my people have to travel hours and hours every week with vehicles loaded with supplies, with food, with water, traveling over unpaved roads. He goes, how does this help us? You know, he goes, and one of the things that we were stating during the hearing is that by limiting the choice, you know, of vehicles, New Mexicans basically in their purchase of vehicles has three opportunities. They can special order a vehicle, for example. They can leave out of state and buy the vehicle of choice or opt for a slightly used vehicle. So if more and more used vehicles are in demand because of limiting of choice, what does that do? It raises the price of used vehicles. So quoting, you know, Dr. Nygren, he says, this rule is forcing my people to keep older, dirtier vehicles on the road. How is that helping emissions?
Let me interrupt you. Let me ask you to look at Exhibit 14. Do you recognize that as a letter from the Navajo Nation, Dr. Boo Nygren?
Yes.
Describe to the board how that letter came to be from your understanding.
So after the conversation with some of our dealers in Dr. he was very, very concerned and wanted to reach out to the governor of his concerns. So the letter that is filed within testimony is a letter from Dr. Nygren expressing his concerns on the proposed rules and offering, like we all are, to work together for the transition of electric.
And is it your understanding that that states the official position and concerns of the Navajo Nation?
Absolutely. They were very interested in submitting comments to the board for consideration on their views. Unfortunately, the hearing order did not allow public comments. So we were able to, with the permission of President Nygren, to include this in the testimony.
Can you describe what you have seen as the executive director with data from dealers to the electric vehicle market since the hearing? And if you want to refer to your exhibit, please do.
Sure. So what we have been doing is we've been following motor vehicle division data from the state of New Mexico. And some of the data that I present, even though it's described in the testimony, is cherry picked. It's data. Data is data. And what that data is basically new vehicles sold that were titled and registered with the New Mexico Motor Vehicle. How accurate more of a picture that is. So the data that we show, you know, we started tracking in January 1st of 22, all the way through current. And what that data shows is that the electric vehicle new car market, vehicles sold, we're tracking EVs, we're tracking plug-in hybrids, we're tracking regular, even though regular hybrids are. And what we're seeing is that EV market penetration, if you will, has been less than 4% for the last 25 months, except for 2 months. We had 2 months that were over 4% in September and October of 2023, but yet it's declined to an average of about 3.6 since then. A lot of my testimony that was included, or some of my testimony that was included that's before you, is various different articles from national publications related to what we were mentioning in November, is that the EV market has flattened a bit, has been not moving forward to the projection that we all thought it would maybe a couple of years ago. And, our biggest concern, or one of our biggest concerns, is that at 4%, and in less than 2 years, we're looking at 43%. You all have implemented a mandate that is going to expect or hope that the EV market is going to increase by 1,000% in just 2 years. I'm not sure how that's possible. So one of our recommendations is we should let the market work naturally. We see EVs as part of the transportation future. We see technology ever increasing as far as range. We see DOT's work and other private businesses work in installing electric vehicle charging stations. And as all of that comes together, including the dealers' work in providing electric vehicles, in training, all of that is going to work naturally, if you will, and not have some mandate that is imposed that ultimately hurts New Mexicans. Since the hearing, we've seen 2 states try to implement the rules, and their regulatory bodies fail to pass it. And that is most recently Maine, and prior to that, Connecticut. Our council here, elaborated and provided information of what President Biden did in the last couple of days. Another point that's not being mentioned is ACCII has still not been approved by the EPA. And now we have doubts with what has occurred over the last couple of days. Will they even certify this? The Clean Air Act and some of the thoughts behind it and case law behind it is that emissions should be at a federal standard, and it makes it easier for manufacturers where we all are working together on climate change. But being able to leave the state and buying a regular vehicle and bringing it back in doesn't make sense. You're hurting New Mexicans, hurting businesses, hurting jobs, and that's, our main concern in our request for state. That's the irreparable.
Let me ask you to focus on 2 pieces of data. So look at your Exhibit 1, please, which is your bar chart of sales.
Okay.
And I'd like you to just focus on the November and the January data. I'm not sure if we had the November data at our hearing. Do you recall?
No, the data that we receive is probably 4 to 6 weeks behind from what we get from MBD.
So you have 2 new points of data since the hearing,
Yes.
and you label those as November 23 and January 24 in Ortiz Exhibit 1. Please identify what those show as far as any kind of upward trend or downward trend or anything else.
Sure. So jumping back to September 23, which is about the latest data that we had prior at the November hearing, we saw through motor vehicle division data here in New Mexico that the EV market share was 4.4% and the plug-in hybrid market share was 1.8%. 2 months later, in November 23, the EV market rate decreased from 4.4 to 3.53, while the plug-in hybrid increased from 1.08 to 1.61. And then in January, it pretty much stayed flat from 3.53 in November of 23 to 3.65 in January of 24. Meanwhile, the plug-in hybrid decreased a bit from 1.61 to 1.37 respectively.
And the other information I'd like you to share is what happened in the legislature with respect to incentives for purchase of electric vehicles?
Sure. So during the 2024 legislative session, there was a bill that was introduced on both the House and the Senate side that provided some EV tax credits for the purchase of qualifying EVs and plug-in hybrids. Like to state that, first of all, we are disappointed because in our discussions, even before the hearing, we were told that we were going to be provided a draft of the bill and they wanted our input. Well, none of that came to be. So the bills were introduced, and when we saw the bill and we heard some of the testimony, it was being billed in committee hearing, testified that it was a cash on the hood incentive, and it's not. Cash on the hood incentive is an incentive where the dealers can offer a discount at the point of sale or at the time of purchase. What this bill requires is that in order to receive a certificate of tax credit from the Energy, Minerals, and Natural Resources, a consumer has to provide proof of purchase or proof of lease, along with registration in New Mexico or application for title and registration. It's basically a form right before it gets titled and registered. After those two documents are submitted to the Energy, Mineral, and Natural Resources, they will issue a certificate of tax credit back to the consumer. That tax credit does become transferable. However, that is several weeks after the sale. In visiting with our dealers on the makeup of this bill, basically all the dealers said, we'll never accept that, because how are we supposed to give a discount at the time of sale and hope that their customer is going to apply for that EV tax credit certificate, hope that they're going to come back to us, and then all that does for us is it offsets tax liability when we file our taxes. Unlike the federal program under the Inflation Reduction Act, that dealer can offer the $3,750 or $7,500 discount at the time of sale because IRS has developed a portal where the dealer would enter vehicle-specific information, customer-specific information, and a check would be issued from the Department of Treasury back to the dealer within 48 to 72 hours. We met with the sponsor of the bill. We met with Tax and Rev to understand that Taxation Revenue Department to make sure our understanding was correct. It was correct, but they weren't interested in making any amendments to really work as a true cash on the hood. So we feel it's going to be underutilized. It is going to be utilized for sure if a person files it and offsets their tax liability at the end of the year. But to us, does it incentivize the purchase of EVs? We're highly skeptical.
Mr. Demenci, please wrap up.
This will be my last question. What's the amount of
the tax credit? It starts at $3,000 for the qualifying EV or plug-in hybrid, and that's for the purchase price of $55,000 or less. It is in place for about 2.5 years. It becomes effective May 15th for tax year 2024, and it expires 2.5 years later. The next year, it offers about half of that amount, and then the last year, it offers another half of that amount, and then it sunsets after about 4 years.
I have nothing further. This witness.
Great, thank you. Let me ask, there's cross-examination. Hold on, Mr. Ortiz, by Mr. Maxwell. All right, thank you. Mr. Knight. Thank you. Questions, Mr. Bach? All right. Thank you very much, Mr. Ortiz.
Could we see if the board has any questions?
Oh.
For the boards?
I think I did this last time as well. Let me ask those in the room first this time. Member Ely?
And Mr. Ortiz, I hope you can answer this question. It's kind of related to Mr. Domenici's openings regarding the focus of the stay. It's really centered on ZEVs and not full rule. And I'm sorry I missed that in your file. Not see that. Specifically, which section of the rule do you want stay? Or sections?
I don't have the section citation number to answer your question, but I'm hoping. So it looks like section 20.2.91 NMAC to 20. I'm sorry, it's 20.2.91.108 through 20.2.91.109.
So you are proposing, I think 109 is the early act. So you are proposing to stay the early act portion of Part 91.
That's correct. It can certainly be implemented voluntarily by all the dealers. But it's part and parcel of the portion of AC2 we're asking to be stayed.
Thanks for explaining that.
Thank you. Vice Chair Trujillo.
Apologies, I got off here looking for that citation. I had a question about the sources that you use when you're pulling data. I was just curious if you ever use the source Evaluate New Mexico Atlas tool.
Member Chair, Vice Chair Trujillo, I'm aware of that, and we look at that, but our data is through the originator is New Mexico Motor Vehicle Division, and there's a third-party administrator that a lot of state associations use, including the state of California. That vendor's name is CrossSell, and they receive their data from various states, and they provide access to a tool that allows us to run reports of various different needs, and that's what we use for my chart and my data.
Okay, thank you very much. And just for my clarification while I review the information, I was wondering if Mr. Domenici could write down the sections that were wanted to specifically look at, so I make sure I look at them correctly.
We filed a proposed order, excuse me. I looked on the docket. I'm not sure on the docket or not.
Yes, and I apologize. I've got like a whole
But,
bunch of windows here up with the.
but
Vice Chair Trujillo, it is on the exhibit, the Automundo de Garcia and New Mexico Automotive Dealers Association Joint Consolidated Reply.
Okay, thank you. I do have that one open as well. Okay, thank you.
I'll say both.
Thank you, Chair Sweeney. Question?
No, I don't. Sorry.
Member Garcia.
I have a question. I always thought that model years out. What I'm reading in the testimony is that did I hear model year 2025 is already showing up?
Madam Chair, Member Garcia, yes. In fact, so I would say depending on the manufacturer, and there's different times during the preceding year that the next year model comes available. But what I've seen so far this year is that dealerships already have model year 2025 vehicles on their lot available for sale, and it is in March preceding year. So I defer to our dealers that will be testifying how early they get, but my thought is somewhere in the February to early March timeframe, dealerships are starting to receive the next model year's inventory available for sale.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Let's go to the board members on the platform. Member Bitzer.
I have no questions, no further questions. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Member Honker.
I have no questions.
All right, thank you. Now let's turn to the Albuquerque board. Chair Paul, I see you on the screen.
I have no questions. Sounds like other board members do.
Yes, all right. Let's go. Let's go to, I think your vice chair was Richards, right? Ms. Richards, Vice Chair Richards.
I have no questions. Thank you.
Right. Member Galuski.
No questions. Thank you.
Okay, Member Armijo.
No questions.
Member Coleman. They have stepped away. Okay, is there anyone that I missed on the Albuquerque board who has a question? No. All right. Thank you very much, Mr. Ortiz.
We'll call our next witness, Terry Garcia.
Ms. Garcia, if you would raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth?
I do.
Thank you.
Ms. Garcia, will you reintroduce yourself to the board?
Yes. Madam Hearing Officer, board's member of the board. My name is Terry Garcia. I'm an automotive dealer in Gallup, New Mexico, which is rural in the Four Corners, borders the largest border city on the Navajo Nation. I have a Chevrolet, a Toyota, a Chrysler, Dodge, Jeep, and Ram store. We've been in business for 42 years. I've been the dealer principal for about 5 now, executive manager, general manager, finance representative, pretty much anything and everything. Round up. I was 6 years old when we opened it, so child labor law didn't really. I did a lot of odd jobs.
And you summarize your testimony for the boards.
To summarize the testimony, first off, we are not opposed to tailpipe emission reduction. Being born and raised in rural New Mexico, unfortunately, this mandate has forgotten anybody outside of the I-25. So what I'm concerned with is that recently adopted advanced clean car rules will cause irreparable harm throughout New Mexico, and especially in the rural and tribal areas of our state. I have firsthand knowledge of many of these challenges to my customers who live in rural New Mexico and or on tribal land on a day-to-day basis. My customers, my employees, myself, we've got 150 miles in any direction except south, because there's no facilities in Zuni, and that's 38 miles south. It's 165 to Flagstaff, 147 to Farmington, and 150 to Albuquerque for any medical, airport, shopping, big box retailers, hospital. I mean, our hospital's on the verge of closing. But for rural New Mexico, mileage is a huge issue. And being a rural dealer, I've got customers, I've got employees that drive from Farmington, New Mexico to work. For me in Gallup, New Mexico, I have 4 of them. I've got employees that drive from Ganado, Arizona, from Kayenta, Arizona. I don't know if you understand, Kayenta is 96 miles from Gallup. Ganado is 60 miles. I've got employees that drive from Winderock, Salee, Sheep Springs, Rama, Finch Lake, Zuni, that come to Gallup to work. That's just employed with me. We've got students that travel these same distances daily with their parents on those roads. One of the main obstacles that we see in rural New Mexico is range anxiety. And your manufacturers are going to tell you, and I'll tell you right now, the Silverado, they're touting it's 400 miles. That's with no electronics on in the vehicle, and that's at sea level. Gallup is at 8,100, or at 6,500 feet, 81 in some areas. That range automatically is going to be cut by 35 to 40%. So without the infrastructure available, especially on the Navajo Nation, 27,000 square miles is the Navajo Nation that surrounds my rural part of New Mexico. There is the infrastructure out there. I did meet, it was testified to in November that the Navajo Nation was talked to. Well, the Navajo Nation president, Dr. Boo Nygren, I reached out to him through his chief of staff, Alvin Trujillo. He's so adamant and worried about this. He drove from Winderock, Arizona, left at 4:00 in the morning to meet with me and Mr. Garcia to discuss this. He's in absolute opposition, wrote a letter to the governor, and would have liked to have an opportunity to speak today in opposition. His worries for his Navajo people to reside on the reservation, infrastructure that he is focused on, is bringing water to his people, electricity, and broadband so that they have 911 emergency services. EVs are not on his radar because, number one, how are you going to ranch? How are you going to haul water to your homes? How are you going to charge these vehicles if there's no electricity within 5 to 10 miles from you? How are you going to drive 90 miles to take your kids to school? How are you going to drive 90 miles in one direction to go to work? Not to mention the health, safety, and welfare of his people. He was adamant in this meeting. If something happens, where they're stranded, there's been no infrastructure, there's been no training on first responders. This is another issue for the Navajo Nation Police. Dr. Nygren hammered home about. They don't have the training, they don't have the technology. If they go to a wreck and they're not trained properly and try to retrieve an individual out of a vehicle, they could kill themselves and the individual with electrocution. These are issues Dr. Nygren is extremely concerned about, and everybody else in rural New Mexico. Half of our areas are provided by volunteer firefighters on a volunteer basis. That's 20,000 square miles. What ifs? And right now, the infrastructure is not there in rural New Mexico to support this. Now, if you live in Gallup and want to purchase one, that's fine. But just like I testified in November, I still have the same Toyota battery electric vehicle I testified to sitting on my lot 6 months later with a $5,000 discount, bringing it to right about $39,000, and I still don't have anybody interested in it. My plug-in hybrids with Stellantis, the Jeep 4xEs, the only way they'll qualify for the tax credit, both state and federal, is if you lease the vehicle. If you lease, you're capped at 12,000 miles a year. I live 1.5 miles from my stores. I can't meet 12,000 miles a year. The mileage that we drive in rural New Mexico. Where am I going to charge this vehicle back and forth on the road when there's not even electricity in the areas I'm driving through or cell phone service? I don't think they're going to build a generator big enough to put enough chargers along some of those corridors. And these are the concerns we have. These, like I said, again, rural New Mexico tribe and pueblos have not been talked to or conferred about these. And again, meeting with President Nygren, he is extremely concerned about the areas. President Nygren feels at this time that an electric vehicle is not a viable choice due to the lack of paved roads, the lack of charging stations on the reservation. President Nygren indicated that his priorities are providing water, electricity, and broadband to his people. In addition, he's concerned with the affordability of EVs and fears his people will not be able to afford them. Will be forced to drive their older vehicles longer, and this rule will increase the price of the vehicle. This issue appears to be counterintuitive to the goals that we are trying to achieve.
Ms. Garcia, you understand we're not asking to redo the board's decision. We're just asking to stay it while we appeal it. But irreparable harm could occur if the rule takes effect, you are delivered electric vehicles, and then perhaps sometime after that, the rule is reversed.
Irreparable for my community. My Dodge store, Stellantis store, employs 70 people. I have not ordered a vehicle Stellantis since October of 2023 because as of right now, I don't know if I'm going to keep that franchise, because if they're going to mandate to me what I can and cannot sell my customers or what's best for my customers to drive, then I'm not going to represent a manufacturer that does that. So there will be 70 families, 70 jobs lost if I terminate my contract. And that's what I'm contemplating at this point in time. Because I cannot look at my consumers and tell them that they're forced to drive a vehicle that will not meet their needs. It is being mandated to me by a manufacturer. Therefore, I would terminate the franchise. That my town of 20,000, 70 employees, that's a huge loss. We don't have jobs to fill those 70 people.
Would the loss of those choice of vehicles affect your customers?
Absolutely.
Describe that, please.
90% of my customers come from the reservation or low income. And my Chevrolet store alone, tracks, the 2024 tracks that's on ground right now, I can't keep enough of them in stock. I don't have any of them. That starts at 24,000 MSRP, and we sell within 3 to 5 days once we get those in, but we're getting maybe 5 to 9 of those a month. By reducing the number of vehicles that our customers can purchase, it's going to force them to go out of state, which is going to force a price gouge out of state. And any other dealer is going to see that they can't purchase that vehicle in New Mexico. Price of the vehicle is going to go up, but then they're going to turn right around and re-register that in New Mexico. It's forcing business out of here, which in turn will make us as the business owners downscale the amount of employees we have. Therefore, it's going to take a huge economic impact on the state of New Mexico and the people that we employ if we don't have the business to keep them there.
That's all the questions I have. Thank you. Board, other people or the board may have.
Thank you. Mr. Maxwell, do you have questions of Ms. Garcia? Thank you. Mr. Knight? Thank you. Mr. Bach? We need you to speak into a microphone.
I just wanted to ask a question. I think you said that you would consider terminating your Stellantis franchise agreement. Is that correct?
Yes.
And that's because of what Stellantis is telling you they want you to sell.
Correct.
Okay. So not because of this rule then.
Well, this rule would mandate what they as of March 19th, they have made a dealer communication to make PHEVs, BEVs, and ICE vehicles available to all dealers. By doing that, they still have not given us an allocation spread of what will be able to be ordered. And if I'm cut to 20% ICE, can't keep a store open at 20% vehicles that are sellable.
Okay, but to be clear, it's based on what Stellantis is telling you they're willing to sell you that you would terminate the.
Only,
yes or no?
Only in a CARB state are they going to do that.
Okay, I think we'll hear some other evidence on that later. That's all I have. Thanks.
Mr. Bach, let me start with the city board this time. Chair Paul, do you have questions?
No questions for me. Thank you.
All right. Vice Chair Richards?
No questions.
Right, thank you. Member Armijo?
No questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Member Galuski?
No questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Member Coleman? Did I miss anyone from the city board? All right. We'll come back into the room then. Member Garcia?
Yes, I have a. Yeah, I think part of the issue we're looking at with the stay is to and when the harm might occur, harm that would occur. So between now and the time that the bill is decided, you're to explain to me what would happen to the end of the year, let's say.
Currently, we're ordering 2025 vehicles. 2024 is model year on ground. We are now ordering 2025s. Come the fall, that would go to 2026, which puts us less than a year to be able to meet the mandates. Have that. With Chevrolet, I can speak. They've pushed back to 2050 on going, zero emission. They're not, the Bolt isn't even been decided if it's going to come back, and if it is, what model year. And that was from our dealer communication and all, and it's called a go-to-market meeting. We have the first of every single month. They haven't even come out yet with if they're even going to bring the Bolt back. The Blazer EV, I'm sure you guys see the news. It was on a stop sale for battery issues again. They've cut production down on that vehicle as well. So being able to meet the needs of this mandate just by having the inventory there, Toyota will not do it. It's already, and I think I testified to that in November, Toyota is going away from BEVs and going plug-in hybrid. So Toyota is not an issue with this, but for all three manufacturers and the business-wise, being able to meet with the inventory is going to be almost impossible to meet the mandate. I won't have the supply there to be able to sell it to meet it. The supply has been cut, and and if they're not producing them, then I don't have anything to sell.
Thank you.
Ms. Garcia, I'm sorry to have to ask, but the folks on the platform are occasionally struggling with sound. So just make sure that you keep your mouth pointed at the microphone. All right. Chair Sweeney.
No questions.
All right. Vice Chair Trujillo.
No questions.
Member Ely.
I have no question.
All right. Member Bitzer. Member Bitzer, do you have questions of Ms. Garcia? Okay. He shook his head no. Member Honker?
No questions.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Garcia.
I believe Member Honker recused himself for this issue. I don't know if we want to. Oh, because he wasn't here.
Oh, I'm very sorry. I didn't realize.
Yeah.
Okay.
Put that on the record.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We'll call our next witness, Carlos Garcia.
Carlos Garcia. Thank you. Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth?
Please introduce yourself to the board. Reintroduce yourself.
Madam Hearing Officer, Madam Chairs and members, both boards feel like we got the band back together here. Good to see everybody. My name is Carlos Garcia. I'm here representing Automundo de Garcia, asking that the EIB and the Air Board grant our motion for stay on the clean cars portion of ACCII. It was discussed breaking up the three parts of the ACCII in the hearing, despite what Mr. Fox said. And Mr. Knight alluded to it in his closing, and board members did ask that question, and Ms. Cedillo Lopez did give counsel on that to the Air Board. But I don't feel that there was proper clarification for those different portions, and they probably obviously didn't get the consideration they should. Granting a stay does not mean that the EIB is admitting it was wrong, or the Air Board. It means that these boards believe that there are good reasons to wait to implement the regulation by allowing the legal merits of our case to play itself out in the Court of Appeals, which they will one way or another. Especially, I think that Mr. Domenici has put forth a compelling argument, and as well as what's going on in the world and everything that's changed since our November hearing, I think we have an excellent chance of winning our appeal. We have much more information now that was not available at the time of the hearing. We know it was rushed. We know why it was rushed, for reasons to try to get it in under a time crunch, but that didn't give everybody the chance to properly consider what was happening. I feel that with this EV mandate, there's a tremendous risk of what we call a failed launch from a retail standpoint. A failed launch normally means a quality or readiness issue with a vehicle that results in a consumer outcry and bad media reports. In our industry, it's virtually impossible to recover from something like this. We didn't have the advantage of rebuttal testimony like the climate advocates, but Mr. Bradley talked about a failed launch. And to be honest with you, I mean, our decades of experience in the new retail car business, my dad was a DeLorean dealer. We know what a failed launch is. And not doing this right for New Mexicans and the EV market in general, with all the bad press that's coming through it now, is really hurting that as much as we want it to be successful for our businesses. I think that we all have so much at stake here, including the boards. We all want some cover from this mandate, and I really am hoping that the stay will soften the blow of this rule, and a failed launch really doesn't help any of us. A vehicle on our lot was developed 5 to 7 years ago. Ordering of parts, manufacturing, quotas, and retooling plants occurred 2 to 3 years ago. The lead time for a vehicle to come from concept to reality is really long in auto manufacturing. Distribution doesn't change on the flip of a switch like you were told in the November hearings. It takes years to change production plans for any automaker, even the slightest change from changing out the type of a seat. We saw this in COVID and supply chain issues. It takes years. The industry, we've still never recovered as an industry from supply chain shortages. Many industries still haven't, but especially the auto industry, and especially the auto industry in New Mexico with all the shutdown. We do have 2025 models are arriving. I think that's clear. It's going to take years to recalibrate and correct the market conditions that this type of mandate will take, when the government 2 days ago cut their forecast in half. That really, I feel like, even my testimony, if someone reads an article on what the Biden administration and the EPA passed, it's pretty clear what they're signaling. They cut their forecast in half for 2030. So I think it greatly diminishes the impact of trying to put these crazy numbers out there, because their EPA and the administration are acknowledging that they're just not possible to hit, whether it's California, New Mexico, or anyone else. So the board, this rule has taken on such a life of its own. It's now creating economic and social policy, which, you're here to affect policy on air quality, and that's what your expertise is, and we look to you for that. But this has become so much more than just air quality issue, which we're 100% in support of improving with EVs. I've had great conversations with people on the other side of this. We agree on 85% of what's going on. It's just the business structure and the harm to the business, being able to take care of New Mexicans and customers, that's really problematic, and the manufacturer production relations are nearly impossible here. During our hearing, feel like it's deja vu here. You heard speculative claim after speculative claim from the NMED's so-called experts that were based on a myth. Now you're hearing that everything we said was speculative when we told you what was going to happen, and it did. It's sort of ironic to me that that's the argument being used against us. There were so many assumptions that were unfounded that were made to you, and promises that you heard over and over. Those promises didn't happen. Now we have to deal with the unintended consequences of this rule. The auto dealer's testimony during our hearing was based on facts. We didn't try to bog you down with a million charts and things that were not relevant to the case. The NMED's witnesses were speculating what would happen with more infrastructure and heavy financial incentives. 6 months later, we have answers. The speculation has now been filled with knowledge, not by hired guns that never even came to New Mexico for our hearing, but what the marketplace has told us. There's an indisputable fact here. The EV market is flat. We were sold a bill of goods that there was so much EV demand that these cars were flying off our lots. We told you this was untrue. Since our hearing, Toyota, Honda, General Motors, Ford, and even Volvo, who committed to be 100% EV by 2030, cut off all funding to their EV arm. All these companies cut their forecasts in EV spending. This was on the horizon during our hearing, and we brought it up. Just days after our hearings, much more media coverage came out. And I know Ms. Harris says that newspaper articles aren't valid, but national media and the president of Toyota giving quotes to me seems like a pretty credible source. Toyota is the largest automaker in the world. Honda and Toyota and Subaru are 65% of the market of what we sell here in Albuquerque. And the hottest segment out there, hybrid vehicles, which we said are clear segue to zero emissions vehicles, which we all know they're in the not too distant future. But hybrid vehicles are selling with no federal subsidies right now, and most dealers are sold out of hybrid vehicles. That's showing that consumer demand is there for those vehicles that are concerned about the environment, or those customers that are concerned about the environment. They're not fully ready to adopt an EV for whatever reason. Toyota is the world's largest automaker. They rarely make mistakes, but their non-action on EVs is what lets us know that there's not a sustainable market for these vehicles. Toyota's president on March 4th gave an interview and said they would rather buy the EV offset credits rather than waste money in investing in EVs without consumers ready to buy them. That and the Biden administration boosting their goals are the two most telling things to me. If Toyota's saying, we're not going to build these cars because people don't want them, we're just going to go buy credits from Tesla, that's far more telling to me than anything else I've heard from any other manufacturer. This directly contradicts what you were told by the NMED regarding automakers' commitments to achieve these imposed mandates. The fact that automakers are reaching out, trying to get clarification on the lead-up credits, they're all going to do that. Everybody doesn't have a choice in any ACC state. BMW sending an email or any other manufacturer, they're all going to do that. As part of even during the stay, they can still accrue credits because they're going to keep track of their vehicles. We heard the EPA is still not granted California's waiver for ACC2. Why? They're waiting to see what happens, just like all of us, just like Toyota, just like every customer that we have that's on the fence about these things. There's just too much doubt. And the longer we wait to right the wrongs of the mandate, especially in New Mexico, the more irreparable harm will be caused. There's no amount of money down the line that's going to be able to fix what's going to happen to the auto business and the tens of thousands of employees. They're not just in dealerships, but down the line in automotive services. Everyone sees that the 43% mandate is not achievable in any state, much less New Mexico. It'll be too late. Without a doubt, the most baseless claim you were led to believe was that of huge EV incentives the legislature was going to pass in this most recent session. You heard it from every witness, the NMED, legislators, supporters of the mandate. I heard the governor say, we're going to pass huge EV incentives. I mean big. She spoke in July and October. What did we get? Next to nothing. $3,000 reducing incentive that's income restricted and capped at a new vehicle price, which excludes 75% of the market. And I'll add in there, Ms. Harris didn't like my number of 75% of the EV market. Put in a chart about the top 10 EV sellers. Well, it was an outdated list of base MSRP prices, but it wasn't reflective with transaction prices. And if you take every vehicle available EV on the market from the cheapest one to the most expensive one, about 75% of them are over the New Mexico incentives threshold. So arguably 75% of what manufacturers are building and think people want aren't even going to be applicable for our law. Not one pickup truck qualifies for this incentive. There were 3 2023 model Ford Lightnings for sale at the biggest Ford dealerships in New Mexico yesterday when I looked. Those are pre-price increase cars. None of those cars would qualify. The F-150 is the number one selling car in New Mexico, has been for decades, yet we don't have an incentive that covers a pickup truck that we're all supposed to believe solve everybody's problem. It's just more speculation that you were fed that's totally untrue. When I was asked what it would take to move EVs in New Mexico, I said that it would likely be like the $10,000 per car like they have in Colorado and California. I told legislators on both sides of the aisle, ask for 15,000, hope to get 10. Instead, we got virtually nothing. You were promised earth-shattering incentives on new EVs, used EVs, in hybrid vehicles. $3,000 on new EVs, half of that unused, is not earth-shattering. And it decreases over time. Top of that, if the customer qualifies, despite what Ms. Harris says, it's not an on-the-hood incentive. The tax incentive, which our legislator, Hockman Vigil, who could not articulate how the incentive was paid and had to be saved by the Secretary of Tax and Revenue, it's a $3,000 incentive that goes to the customer that they can transfer to the dealer. So it's not an on-the-hood right-away incentive. Best case scenario for us is we're able to work out a deal. The customer brings it back. You could be 11 and a half months away from getting that money. So you are being a tax collector and we are being a 0% interest bank. That's how this actually works. So it looked to me like it was a kind of a canned response. So this was just a huge failure by the governor and the legislature and everybody that promised you these huge incentives. It's an embarrassment to the administration and an embarrassment to the state that after all that, everything you were led to believe about these huge incentives that were going to move the market, we got $3,000. So you were promised this great program and all you got was the smallest state EV incentive in the United States after everything you heard and all the testimony that was based on it. The fact that ZEV sales would have to increase 1,000% in 3 years in New Mexico just sounds preposterous and impossible now that we can sit back and look at it. It sounds crazy to anybody. Nobody thinks that can happen. Or at least very few people would think that. Last point is New Mexico is a captive orphan in terms of sales volume in the United States. We're the smallest of the small. We get the last choice already when it comes to vehicle allocation because we just don't sell many cars as a state. 0.5% total U.S. new vehicle sales is nothing, especially after what we did in COVID and basically shut off the pipeline to manufacturers. Again, years to try to get us back to where we were, and we're still not there. Manufacturers start trying to produce vehicles in this way. Basically, the only state they have a real shot at this at is California. If they're retooling for that major market, our amount of vehicles are going to be cut so heavily in gas cars that it's going to be a declining number of vehicles that we sell and offer to customers that will never have a chance to recoup all those losses. It's the best definition of irreparable harm that I can think of if we keep moving forward with this. Auto manufacturers are worried about the large states that move big volume. They're not worried about New Mexico. Right, what you were told, calling the manufacturer or sending them a letter about New Mexico is going to do this doesn't do anything. Right? We need to be part of something that is broader, that helps more states. Last couple things were to address the rebuttal testimony from Ms. Harris. She picks at our websites. I know said that we only have 2.8% of our vehicles or EVs on our websites for all the Garcia dealerships. That's true. But what she doesn't ask is how many EV vehicles we have turned down from all of our dealerships that sell them. None. We take them all because we know that we need to sell them. We need to have them available. And it's just a fact that and some manufacturers are making us take them, but the ones that allow us to turn them down, we're still taking them. Try to give a good selection to our customers as our family has for many decades. Told you the truth. Told you the truth on the incentives. Totally not given the truth about. Covered everything else. The last thing was she also made comments about the public comments and how decided to print up some comments in their testimony about people that are in support of it. Well, we're 2,164 comments filed on your website opposed to this and 248 for. We're not told that because the computer shut down magically during the hearing, plus the over 2,000 or 3,000 box comments that were rolled into our last hearing that most of you never even opened or took the boxes home. There were thousands of comments against in those. Of the New Mexico legislators, there's 112. 65 of them sent you letters. 42 of those were in opposition. So those are the real facts. It's not the 20 comments that people they to support it. It was over 90% reached out on comment or against this. Appreciate the time and the extra minute.
Thank you, Mr. Garcia. Mr. Maxwell, do you have questions of Mr. Garcia? Thank you. Mr. Knight? Mr. Bach? All right.
Thanks, Mr. Garcia. I think this should be pretty straightforward and simple. I think it sounds like you reviewed our rebuttal, so probably saw that we had gone to your look at the breakdown model years, correct? Right. You're shaking your head, yes, for the court reporter.
Yes, sorry. That, I did see that.
I always forget that too. Court reporter got to get a. And were those numbers correct that we had?
Yeah, I'm sure they were for the time you look at it. We sell lots of cars every day, so they're probably still pretty close to accurate since you did it 2 days ago.
So I'm looking right now, and it looks like for the model year 2025, you have 10 lot. It's out of a total of 728 new vehicles.
Yeah.
Okay, so about 3.5% of the selection right now is model year 2025.
But it's only March 22nd. I mean, it's 9 months before the calendar year starts. That's what the whole point is. It's not about how many cars I have on the ground. It's that the manufacturers are already building 25s. So that means that we'll be getting 26s on the March 2nd of next year and 27s on March 2nd of 2026. That's what my point was.
Understood. But so I think that we're on the same page that.
But by June, it'll be well over half of our inventory would be 2025s. But just a couple months would be my guess.
But as of right now, you only have 10 2025 vehicles, model year 2025.
Yeah, and I'm sure we've sold some already too.
Okay. That's all I have. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Bach. Let's start with you this time, Member Bitzer. Do you have a question? Mr. Garcia? Can't hear you if you're speaking. So the answer presumably was no.
Sorry, I have the headphones plugged in. No, I do not. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Member Ely?
Yes, I do. Just one, Mr. Garcia. I'm focusing on the next couple of years. 2 years from now, you'll start to get, sounded like, is when you'll start to get model year 27 vehicles onto the lot.
Yes.
So you also talk about a failed launch. Over the next 2 years, how would you experience a failed launch if you're not receiving any of the 27 model years, which is when the rule goes into effect?
Member Ely and members of both boards, that's a great question. And the way that would be experiencing the failed launch is if the state continues to push the mandated numbers, the manufacturers keep pushing EV vehicles in terms of advertising and trying to get these vehicles to sell when there's not the market for them, and the concerns of the public and of New Mexicans are not overcome by forces totally outside of our control, such as charging infrastructure, the cost of a legitimate home charger going in, not the $100 P&M one that we hear about. All those things will contribute to it. The range anxiety and charge anxiety aren't changing. So recently I started taking a much bigger interest in our EV business and talking to so many customers that we sell these cars to. And the people that have them, what I've found is about 70% of the people that I'm selling my EVs to have already had an EV. It's not a new, we've taken EVs and on trade on EVs. So it's not a new market. So if it's not growing, and like I said, the sales are flat despite all the media coverage, it already kind of is a failed launch. Mr. Bradley wants to talk about $25,000 EVs, flying out of the stores. Well, we've been in the car business for almost 100 years. I will tell you, cheap used cars, the name of the game for everybody. That's not even an argument. So it's the new car adoption and the overall customer perception of EVs and what's going on. And if you're driving down the street and you see chargers everywhere, like you do in California, I drive a lot all over town. We have a lot of properties all over town. I haven't seen another charger go in besides the one that's downtown by the old hotel there right by Civic Plaza. So I think customers have the same thing. It's in the perception and the minds of the customers where that failed launch really occurs, because if there's not broad adoption, they don't see their neighbors buying them. Then they read stories about the Chevy that was on stop sale for 6 months, or another vehicle that's supposed to get this great range, and then the New York Times tests it and they get half. All those things contribute to the failed launch. And so that's just sort of in the background, but I think it gets progressively worse if the state taking away choices of gas-powered vehicles and trying to push people to buy more EVs, and they don't deliver with what people want. My example again is on the truck. Can't say it enough. That's going to be a failed launch. If there's no truck that can do what the F-150 does in New Mexico, I can't tell you how devastating that is to the industry and to dealers, but just to people trying to do their job. So all those things contribute to the. Sorry, that was a little.
Just one follow-up question. So the failed launch is just all the preparation leading up to the delivery of the model year 27, which would be affected by this rule. Is that what I hear you saying?
Member Ely and members of both boards, yes, but I'm also talking about it more in the context from a customer perception and marketing and sales standpoint. It's not a pinpoint launch of, hey, we're going to roll out the mandate this date. It's all those things that lead up to trying to get that tipping point of when people are going to start buying the vehicles, like we had with hybrid cars. They were a little slow to take off, and then when they hit, they've been fantastic. So that's really what I'm talking about, it more from a standpoint of the car buying public. If we want broad adoption and we want everybody buying these cars for cleaner air, that's what we need to try to do.
So if you prevail at the appeals court and they reverse the ZEV portion of this rule, and you aren't required to take, or the manufacturers aren't required to deliver a certain percentage of ZEVs, would that then negate the failed launch because you aren't receiving more EVs than perhaps you or your perception of the public wants?
Member Ely and members of both boards, that's correct, because what that would do would open the market for the manufacturers to have the time to develop the product in a proper cadence to where it can be delivered to people in a timely fashion. We all know this is happening. I absolutely unequivocally know that we're going to be at some point in the not too distant future, heavily selling PHEV vehicles. It's just too quick. It's too fast. The infrastructure can't get put in quick enough. And the technology, like Mr. Bach said, he's 100% right. It's getting better every day, but it takes a lot of days to get it to where it's actually feasible for most New Mexicans and their needs. An average New Mexican drives 19,000 miles a year. An average Californian drives 12,000 miles a year. We have different needs. So if our state prevails and we go back to ACCII 1, which is still valid, or the new federal guidelines, I think it's really going to take out a lot of that failed launch, because the manufacturers can do it right, the state can do it right for charging stations, the federal government can get it right for charging stations on interstate highways, and the state can get this incentive thing right. So I think all those things with a little extra time, right, and just delaying it and pushing it back a little bit gives everybody the opportunity to achieve what we're all trying to achieve. It's just too fast. And the federal government acknowledged that by cutting their forecast by half 2 days ago. Very telling to me.
So I was just trying to understand if the failed launch was part of your concern of irreparable harm over the next 2 years, and it wouldn't be if you prevail in the appeals.
Member Ely and members of both boards, I don't think it would be as big of a concern, because like I said in my testimony, the manufacturers, it takes years to develop this product. They know 5 years from now what cars they're going to be building, what they look like, what color is going to be popular. We get these yellow and blue cars that come in. Where did this stuff come from? And all of a sudden, it's the hottest thing out there. And so, their research and what they do is so many years ahead. But now, as we're going into this now, I feel like there already is irreparable harm happening, because manufacturers such as General Motors, and I'm a General Motors dealer, rushing to get this product out is resulting in stop sales, software glitches. All these things are happening at a much higher rate than they do on internal combustion engine cars. And it's not just because of the technology, it's just because they're trying to go so fast. So there is irreparable harm already. You know, I admit it, but we've had EVs that had manufacturer buybacks with under 200 miles on the odometer. I know every manufacturer's had that. So that failed launch that you're talking about is already happening. And I think it'll continue to get worse if we don't prevail and the manufacturers keep trying to produce cars and send them to us to try to build up credits to make California happy. I think it's going to happen 100%. And it will still happen even if we do prevail, because what happens for California and the other ACCII states like Colorado that are big, we're such a leftover to them. They're not going to retool or start sending us a bunch of internal combustion cars because California is so massive. Colorado is a big market, and all the 11 ACCII states together really are going to push these manufacturers to have to build cars to cater to those markets, and we're just an afterthought. And that's, you know, part of the good of being a car dealer in New Mexico and part of the bad. The good part is we're not over dealered and there's not a crazy amount of competition, and we still have local dealers that have been in business for decades like us and Terry and other family stores. Where in major markets, you just don't have that anymore. And so we're able to do great things for our community, whereas, you know, these multinational companies don't care, don't do anything to support the community. In my mind, that's going to be a real loss.
Vice Chair Trujillo.
I'm curious. I've heard two stories throughout this process, and one is that that people can't find these cars. They want them and they can't find them. They have to go to other states to get them. And I've also heard that these cars will sit on lots for 6 months and they're not moving anywhere. So I'm just kind of curious what prevents a consumer from walking into any dealership, or let's say GM, and saying, I want this particular GM model. I realize you don't have it here, but I want it. Can you get it for me? Is there something that prevents that mechanism?
So, Vice Chair Trujillo and members of both boards, I think I have an easy way to explain that. And, you know, we're talking about two totally different things when we talk about this rule, you know, which 99% of it pertains to new vehicles, that type of production, and those cars delivered to New Mexico, and used cars. So, as I mentioned before, you know, people talking about having to go out of state to buy EVs, you know, certainly understand that. But as I said, inexpensive used cars that are clean, that you know, have good mileage, that's always going to be the hottest segment in the industry, whether it's an EV or an ICE-powered car or a diesel truck. So acting like this is a revelation that you're hearing from the other side, that people can't go find EVs. I mean, I have 100 people that have a $5,000 or $10,000 budget, and they all want a Honda CR-V with low miles and service history and everything else. It's not any different from any other part of the industry. Now, what I will tell you is we do have customers like that all the time that have that budget in mind on cars. And, you know, I love sourcing used vehicles. I love finding people cars. I get tons of calls every week from people having me find them anything from a super expensive car to a commuter car. We do try our best to find those cars and source them. You know, there are just not enough of them out there, just like there aren't in regular cars. It's, you know, you're getting told that this is unique to EVs. It isn't. I mean, people go out of state. If they find a low mileage Honda Accord, you know, in southern Colorado with service records that meets their price, they're going to go buy it. It's the same thing for an EV. It's we definitely, and I know most dealers, if somebody tells us this is what we're looking for, we're going to do everything we can to try to find it. That's how we make our living, and we want to make customers happy. So I know I do it, and I can't always find them on EVs. I wish I could. Again, as more of these cars get sold, have greater availability, but singling this out to cars under $25,000 is a fallacy, because you know, I have 40 times the demand for under $20,000 gas cars as I do for EVs.
Thank you for explaining that further. And I just wanted to circle back to a comment. You talked about that box that was delivered to us. And I just want to let you know that I did take my box home and I did go through the box. And I know a number of my fellow board members did as well. And look at the comments that were in them. Because as many of the members of the board here, we care about what the public has to say on issues. I will say that most of those comments were the same comments. They were auto-generated. Actually, they even had the same typos throughout the letters. But I just wanted you to know I hear you, and we are taking in this information to make sure I looked through that box.
Yeah, Vice Chair Trujillo, the members of the both boards. That's why I said almost. I know some of them didn't look because the boxes never moved, and you voted before they were there. And I know that it wasn't one. It was a canned message sent by every person that went and signed up to send them, but ones that were submitted on your website were not. Were sent. They were all sent by IP addresses, but issue there.
Chair Sweda?
No questions at this time.
Questions, thank you.
Very much. Did I go to the city county board yet? All right. Chair Paul?
No questions from me, but I do think Member Galuski has a question.
All right. Member Galuski?
Yes, hi there. I think you mentioned this. Did I hear you say that the EPA has not yet approved the California waiver for Advanced Clean Cars 2?
Member Galuski and members of both boards, that's correct. The EPA is not, unless it happened in the last 10 hours, the EPA has not granted the waiver for ACC2 California, which is what these boards voted to adopt in 23.
And so what does that mean for the status of the rule currently? Does that mean that even California can't start implementing it?
Member Galuski and members of both boards, I mean, that's my question also. I mean, it seemed like this was awfully premature to go through all this and all the hemming and hawing from the governor and the legislatures about incentives when California, and even going back to our May 22 hearing about ACC1, when ACC2 was being considered. I mean, we've spent all this time and tons of us have spent resources on something that still hasn't been approved. The Biden EPA ruling, I think, is going to have a major impact on what ends up happening with this EPA waiver. I mean, you have a great question. I mean, what do we do if it still hasn't been approved? We're doing all this planning, and you're going to hear a ton of testimony this afternoon about speculation about we're going to do this and that, but it still hasn't been approved. So I think your guess is as good as mine, but there's, again, nothing concrete. As we said, it was pure speculation from the other side that it was going to get approved, and now we're the speculators. But either way, it hasn't been approved yet, and I think we could end up back here in another hearing depending on what the EPA does for California.
Okay, yeah, it sounds like it is an important piece of complexity in this. I hope somebody can comment more on what that means if California hasn't, that the EPA hasn't approved this yet. But that's helpful information. Thanks.
Member Armijo?
I have no questions. Thank you.
All right. Vice Chair Richard?
Hi. Yeah, I had a couple of questions. One was in terms of the question that was asked by Member Galuski. Generally, do you have the time frame for when a rule is passed, for example, by the state for Clean Cars 2, and when EPA actually approves it? Do you have knowledge of that?
Vice Chair Richards and members of both boards, I don't. I'm not this is my first foray into EPA regulations other than, the basic thing of 50 state cars and things that happened, which were much, much simpler. So I don't know what the timeline is. Not
okay.
I know California did approve their ACC2 right after we did ACC1. So it's been almost 2 years ago that they approved ACC2, and the EPA still hasn't granted the waiver 2 years later, which is telling to me also.
Thank you. I just know, having been on the board, that sometimes we'll make changes, for example, to the state implementation plan, and it takes a while for EPA to sign off on it, it's sometimes delayed significantly. So the other question I had was whether or not it concerns kind of sort of a graphical element, which is early adopters and then mainstream, and finally they call them late adopters. And it's typical for any kind of behavioral change. I'm a public health specialist, so you see that kind of change occurring almost for any kind of intervention. And I'm just wondering whether you have noticed that for other government implemented policies in terms of car sales. For example, you think of public health things like seatbelt usage, or now we're looking at there's these things that prevent you, electronically from tailgating somebody who's in front of you and keeps a safe distance. Do you feel there's a role for government intervention in those types of public health interventions?
Member Richards or Vice Chair Richards and members of both boards, I absolutely do. Senator Ben Ray Lujan called me and called my brother very early on when he was talking about mandated breathalyzer devices in all cars, because we just shouldn't put the public health at risk. And why should something so simple not be in a car, just like a seatbelt? So when seatbelts were made part of federal legislation, or 10-mile-an-hour crash bumpers or child seats, there's always going to be some person that's going to object to it or whatever. But in terms of public health and safety, I think the government definitely has a role in it. I think that the government is right to address the climate crisis and to try to move zero emissions vehicles along 100%. Now, when it's safety related, it's much easier and people are going to adopt to it much quicker. Now, when you're telling someone how to spend their money, such as this EV mandate does, that's totally different. So I think that the air quality issue is the most important thing out of all this, 100%. I absolutely think that, and I think the government subsidizing these chargers and vehicles is very important. I think it's been a successful program. I think that if they really want it to happen, they need to do more. But you need a combination in something where it's affecting how people spend their money, unlike a safety-related item where there's consumer choice there. You have to have a balance of what the government's urging you to do and what they're telling you to do. And so they're telling you you're going to buy a car with a seatbelt is a little bit different than saying that you have to buy an electric truck that can get you to work in the morning. Those are two totally different things. So I do think the government has place in these types of issues, especially when it comes to safety issues. But when it comes to choice of how people spend their hard-earned money, just think that that's reaching a little too far. My personal opinion.
Okay, thank you. I just had one more question. Have you done any kind of, or your industry for this clean cars rule, done any kind of cost benefit analysis? It seems like you have a lot of data, but a lot of it is just based kind of on the internally with your industry. Are you aware of any kind of cost benefit analysis reports that have been done, peer reviewed, that we might be able to access?
Vice Chair Richards and members of both boards, there is data published by the NADA and the Automotive Alliance. We can get those emailed to you. I know from my own experience in our dealerships, what I've seen and from talking to the larger EV dealers such as Ford, because their losses on the EV cars are so huge, there's no markup on them. So I know the margin is very small, like on Fords. The Mach-E, the dealer cost is higher than the window sticker, which is absolutely crazy. I know our margins on the $60,000 Cadillac are much smaller. $60,000 electric Cadillac are much smaller. So from our standpoint, the profit margin on the cars is a lot smaller. You hear opponents talking about, you don't have to service these cars and they're maintenance free. That's really not true. You're replacing tires twice as fast. We were able to make money on that. And these cars have so many problems. We're actually getting a lot of service work from them. I like the EV business. I've spent a lot of money training my people and sending them to class, buying the equipment, because it's going to be a good revenue source. So for us, cost benefit analysis, we have certainly come nowhere near recouping over $1 million that we've spent in our company on EV training and equipment from our sales and service business, but it'll get there. And I think hopefully the initial investment lasts a little longer than it's appearing that it will. But the cost benefit for us, it's not there yet, but it does look to me like it's a viable business if we're able to get the timeline right and get consumer demand evened up with.
Okay, so you're saying that I'm sorry, I lost you a little bit. Just to confirm, you're saying your industry does cost benefit analysis, but there's no sort of objective analysis that you've looked at from peer reviewed
Vice Chair
articles?
Richards and members of the board, I think that the NADIA has them and the Automotive Alliance has them. That those would be considered peer reviewed. I know the climate advocates use some of their data, so we're happy to send those to you. I don't know what they say offhand. I just am in my bubble of looking at it.
Okay, great. Thank you. But it sounds like from the last part of your previous comments, eventually parity is met. You have kind of an initial investment hump, but once consumer demand starts occurring, that it evens out and your investment is, a return on your investment is achieved. So that's helpful. That's all I had. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions from either board? Thank you very much, Mr. Garcia.
We don't have any further witnesses. I would just move the exhibits that were attached to the NOIs into evidence.
All right, thank you. Do I hear any objections from anyone? All right, thank you very much. Your exhibits are admitted. Let's take a lunch break. We'll come back at 1:15, and I will ask Mr. Maxwell for his statement first, and then we'll turn to the stay opponent. Thank you.